The Apple Watch is the best-selling watch of all time, with over 100 million sold since its launch in 2015. But without the murder of a man you've never heard of, George Glaser, it would never have happened. This is how his death led to the creation of the most popular watch of all time. But before I tell you about George, let me introduce you to Peter Henlein. He was born in 1845 to parents Hans and Barbara Henlein, and was brother to Hermann Henlein. The family lived in Nuremberg and made their money with metal. Hans was a brass forger and locksmith, and Hermann a cutler, a maker of cutlery. It was inevitable that Peter would also join the family trade, and so he did in his teens, apprenticing as a locksmith. But his life, unlike his father's, would not be so straightforward. His brother Hermann was accused of murdering a girl and injuring another, for which he was punished with death. Peter spent 2 weeks in prison for branding Hermann's trial as slanderous. As if that wasn't a close enough brush with murder, however, it was about to get a whole lot closer in Peter's life. In 1504, on a night on the town with fellow locksmiths George Huss and Paul Tefler, things very quickly went sour. A fight broke out with Peter in the middle of it, and once the dust had settled, a man, George Glaser, another locksmith, was dead. A warrant for the arrest of the 3 men was issued, and fearing his own death by execution, much like his brother's, Peter fled. He sought asylum at the Franciscan monastery of Nuremberg, where his plea was accepted. There have been monasteries in Nuremberg since 1140, with the Franciscan monastery built in 1224. It just so happened that, during Peter's 4-year stay at the monastery, a number of very talented individuals passed through, including monk and clockmaker Friedrich Kraft. It wasn't unusual for monks to build clocks for monasteries. In fact, the first recorded clock ever to be built was created in the year 996 by the future Pope Sylvester II. One of the oldest surviving clocks was built by Peter Lightfoot, a monk of Glastonbury, around the 14th century. Monasteries were hubs for the community, providing many different services, and timekeeping was one of them. By Peter Henlein's time, the clocks being built were very impressive and complex. The clock built by Friedrich Kraft was a horologium, an astronomical device that depicts the movement of the solar system. This utterly fascinated Peter, whose skills as a locksmith transferred very well to clockmaking. It wasn't uncommon for fine metal workers like locksmiths and blacksmiths to transition into clockmaking, but for Peter, the passion caught deep. These clocks, however, were large and cumbersome. They weren't by any means portable and required time-tellers to come to it, rather than it be there for the need of the time-teller. They were also powered by hanging weights, which meant they needed to remain upright and stationary to work. Peter had an idea. Instead of driving the clock with a weight, he would use a component he had become very familiar with making as a locksmith: a spring. He could shrink the clock's basic components down to just an hour hand, power it with a spring, and fit it in a small portable case. It just so happened that Nuremberg was in the middle of a plague, known as the French Pox. This plague would cover the victim's genitals with pustules that would later cover the entire body. Limbs, especially at night, would be wrought with agony. In some cases, symptoms extended to hair loss and even bone erosion. One of the preferred methods to ward off this pox was the use of a pomander, a small spherical container made from metal that would be filled with perfume for the purpose of disinfection. They were sometimes manufactured as tabletop items, but were mostly small enough to be worn as pendants, fashioned from precious metals so they might also be stylish. With limited resources for his new invention, being unable to leave the monastery, Peter sourced a pomander to form the case of his new miniature clock, which would become known as a pomander watch. It wasn't particularly accurate, but it proved the point. Timekeeping could be small and portable. Friend of Peter, Johannes Koklaus, described the watch as a work that even the most learned mathematicians admire, and he was right. Once Peter was able to leave the monastery, He agreed to settle on a fine of 21 florins. His work became popular with high society, and he found himself travelling the country as a representative of the council that had once tried to have him executed. Peter died in 1542 and was celebrated 400 years later by the city of Nuremberg as the father of the watch. His portable device paved the way for the great masters like Thomas Mudge and Abraham Louis Breguet, and established the format of the pocket watch that would eventually become small enough to wear as a bracelet. And if he'd not been accused of murder, none of that would have happened, and the Apple Watch today may well have never been. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the unlikely origins of the watch. If you did, please do like, comment and subscribe, and check me out over on the Watchfinder channel too. Thanks, and see you next time.